We live, in fact, in a world starved for solitude, silence, and privacy, and therefore starved for meditation and true friendship. Have you ever felt a deep ache within, wondering why you feel distant from those you once connected with? That feeling of isolation can cut deep, leaving you questioning your place in the world. But perhaps this sense of separation isn't a sign of rejection or failure. Instead, it may be God gently pulling you aside to reconnect with Him, away from the distractions that keep you from hearing His voice clearly. Is your heart restless, longing for something more, something deeper than the fleeting connections and busyness around you? This restlessness could be God calling you to a season of solitude, not to abandon you, but to transform you. Throughout Scripture, we see God drawing His people away from the crowd to speak to their hearts. Just like Jesus called His disciples away from their normal lives, or when Moses spent years in the desert before leading Israel. God often uses solitude to prepare us for something greater. You may be in a season where relationships seem to fall apart, where the busyness of life is suddenly stripped away, and in that quietness, the emptiness you feel is profound. But it's in this stillness that God is most present, calling you to find your true identity in Him, not in the validation or presence of others. Maybe you've been struggling to make sense of the silence in your life, wondering why it feels like everything has been taken from you. This isolation may feel like abandonment. But what if it's God's way of taking you deeper? Like a surgeon working with precision, God may be cutting away the distractions and relationships that have been strengthened in your soul, but not truly feeding it. When God calls you into solitude, it's not to leave you lonely, it's to heal you, restore you, and reveal His purpose for you. It's in these moments of quiet, away from the noise, that God shapes our character, nurtures our faith, and strengthens our spirit. So, I invite you to stay with me as we explore this journey of solitude together. Let's dig deep into the places where our hearts hurt the most and seek the peace that only God can give. Like C.S. Lewis believed, it's in the stillness that we find our truest friendships and our most genuine connections, not just with others, but with God Himself. If this resonates with you, if you felt God's tug pulling you into a season of solitude, like and leave a comment below. Let's walk through this together, because sometimes the most profound transformation happens in the quiet. Stay tuned for more insights into recognizing God's call to be alone and how it can change your life. Can I hear a hallelujah from you? Sign 1, a desire for more of God. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." Have you ever felt an emptiness that nothing around you seems to fill? That deep ache in your heart? The constant longing for something more? What if it's not a flaw, but a signal that God is calling you? When God stirs within you a desire to know Him more deeply, you can no longer be satisfied by the routines and comforts that once brought you peace. The things that once seemed enough now feel shallow, leaving you questioning if there's more to life than the day-to-day grind. Have you ever wondered why you feel restless even when things seem to be going well? This longing, this inner discontent, could be God drawing you out of the ordinary and into a season of solitude, where He is ready to reveal more of Himself to you. Just as C.S. Lewis spoke of desires that point beyond this world, God uses these deep yearnings to show us that there is more to discover, more to understand, and more to experience of Him. When God calls you to be alone, it's not an act of isolation for the sake of being lonely. It's a sacred invitation into His presence, a chance to break free from the distractions and noise that drown out His voice. Have you noticed how hard it is to focus on your spiritual life when you're surrounded by the constant demands of everyday life? God knows this, and that's why He calls you to step away, to find space where you can truly hear Him. This stirring in your heart is not a punishment, it is a divine disruption. It's God's way of pulling you aside, gently nudging you to seek Him in a deeper way. He is inviting you to step into a place where the ordinary no longer holds your attention, where only the extraordinary will do. Have you ever felt that your soul is yearning for something beyond what you can see? That's because God is drawing you closer, urging you to step away from what is familiar so that you can experience His presence in a more profound way. When we embrace this solitude, we discover a richness that routine can never offer. We begin to see our need for God in ways that the busyness of life has masked. So, what if the restlessness you feel is not something to be solved, but something to be explored? What if it's God's way of calling you into a deeper relationship, one that transcends the surface-level faith we've grown used to? C.S. Lewis once observed, "We may ignore, but we can nowhere evade the presence of God." The world is crowded with him. He walks everywhere incognito. Have you ever felt a deep pull toward God? An inner yearning that you can't quite explain. Perhaps it's more than just a passing thought or a fleeting desire. It might be a longing to understand something about God that you haven't yet grasped. A mysterious invitation pulling you away from the distractions of the world. This yearning often goes beyond curiosity. It's a stirring in your soul, calling you to leave behind the comfort of what you know. Have you ever wondered why moments of isolation seem to bring out these profound questions about God and faith, as though he is asking you to step away from the crowd to seek him more deeply? Paul, the apostle, felt this same pull when he withdrew to Arabia after encountering Christ. He didn't seek approval or validation from others. Instead, he sought God alone in the desert, a place where silence speaks louder than words. It was in that solitude that Paul's convictions were shaped, his faith deepened, and his ministry given its foundation. Have you found yourself in a season where the familiar voices around you no longer seem to satisfy the questions in your heart? This might be God's gentle way of inviting you into your own Arabia, a place where you can wrestle with the deeper truths of your faith without interference. C.S. Lewis understood this inner conflict well. He believed that solitude could lead us to divine encounters that would otherwise remain hidden in the hustle of daily life. The world, with all its noise and distractions, has a way of dulling our senses to the divine. When God calls you into solitude, he's not asking you to run away from life, but rather to step into a sacred space where he can speak directly to your heart. Think of John's vision in Revelation 4 verse 1, where the voice like a trumpet calls him to come up here, a higher place of understanding, where mysteries are revealed and God's will unfolds. Are you in a place where you feel that deep call for more, but the answer seemed just out of reach? Solitude might be the key to unlocking those hidden things of God that have been stirring in your heart. It's in these quiet, often uncomfortable places that God draws us closer, not to isolate us, but to prepare us for something greater. If you're feeling restless, remember this could be the very invitation from God to withdraw from the noise and step into his presence. In the silence, you may find answers, healing, and the kind of faith that changes everything. C.S. Lewis once reflected, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Have you ever felt a deep yearning that goes beyond what you can explain? A feeling that something is missing in your spiritual walk despite all the knowledge you've already gained? Like John on the island of Patmos, it's in these moments of solitude that God often calls us to go deeper, to receive something new, something greater. What if that restlessness you've been feeling is God's invitation to leave behind the noise of your everyday life and step into a place of quiet revelation? John, though filled with many revelations from God already, was called once again to a deeper place of understanding. Can you imagine what it must have felt like, isolated on an island, yet drawn into a divine encounter that changed the course of spiritual history? Sometimes we find ourselves in similar places, wondering why we feel disconnected or why our spiritual practices seem to have lost their vibrancy. Could it be that God is calling you higher, just as he did with John? Often, God stirs within us a desire that we cannot ignore, a longing for something more. This is not dissatisfaction with life, but rather a divine urge to experience him more fully. What if the yearning in your heart, the one you've been trying to push aside, is actually God pulling you closer, calling you into a deeper, more intimate relationship with him? It's easy to become comfortable with what we already know about God, to settle into a routine of faith that feels safe. But God rarely works within our comfort zones. He draws us out, just as he drew John into the silence of Patmos. Solitude isn't about isolation, it's about positioning ourselves to hear God more clearly, to receive the fresh revelations he has in store for us. Have you ever felt like your spiritual growth has stalled, as if you're just going through the motions? That feeling could be a sign that God is inviting you to something more, that he is whispering for you to come away and be alone with him so he can speak directly to your heart. As Lewis said, God often uses our pains and longings to get our attention, to remind us that we are made for something greater. Are you ready to listen? Are you prepared to step into the solitude where God may be calling you, trusting that what he reveals there will change you forever? Sign 2. Perceived hatred from those around you. C.S. Lewis once observed, "We are not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We are wondering how painful the best will turn out to be." Have you ever felt the sting of rejection from people you care about, leaving you confused and questioning your worth? That pain, that loneliness, might seem unbearable at times, But what if this very pain is God's way of drawing you closer to Himself? When we experience rejection, it's easy to assume it's a personal failure or even a spiritual attack. But could it be that God is allowing this to happen to guide you toward Him? Rejection, in this sense, may be a divine redirection. We often crave acceptance and approval, believing that if others validate us, we are somehow more secure or valuable. How many times have you changed the way you speak or dress, hoping to fit in or gain someone's approval? Yet, the constant chase for validation can distract us from the deeper relationship we are meant to have with God. We think that acceptance from others will fulfill the longings of our heart, but it only leaves us feeling emptier. God, however, knows this, and in His wisdom, He sometimes allows the relationships we rely on to fade or fall apart, not to hurt us, but to clear the way for a more intimate connection with Him. Have you ever noticed that after losing people's approval, you feel an inner pull to seek something more lasting and more stays? This process of being set apart isn't meant to leave you lonely. Rather, it's a sacred calling. God's ultimate desire is to satisfy the deepest parts of your soul, but He can only do that if He has your full attention. When we hold on too tightly to the approval of others, we may lose sight of the one whose approval truly matters. C.S. Lewis understood this struggle well, writing about how human desires often mislead us, keeping us focused on things that don't last. It's in those moments of rejection that we realize the fleeting nature of human validation and the eternal nature of God's love. Perhaps the rejection you feel isn't punishment, but God's invitation to rest in His unfailing love. When God allows others to pull away from you, He is offering you a rare and precious gift, the opportunity to find your identity in Him, not in the opinions of others. It can be painful to let go of the need for human approval, but it's only when we release that need that we can truly experience the fullness of God's presence. Are you willing to trust God with the space left by those who've walked away? The emptiness you feel might just be the place where God intends to fill you with something far greater than you've ever known. In times of rejection, reflect on the possibility that God is redirecting your heart towards something far more fulfilling. Let go of the need for constant validation from others, and trust that God is enough. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." Have you ever faced rejection so painful that it made you question everything about your purpose? That moment when the very people you tried to help turned against you, leaving you confused, hurt, and desperate for escape. Moses knew this feeling all too well. After defending an Israelite by killing an Egyptian oppressor, he thought his people would see him as their protector. But when he later tried to intervene between two Israelites, their rejection cut him deeply. The fear and guilt overwhelmed him, forcing him to flee into isolation. It's in this very place where we feel abandoned, misunderstood, and alone that God often does His most transformative work. Have you ever wondered why your hardest moments seem to lead to unexpected growth? Just like Moses, we may want to run from our failures, hiding from the pain of rejection. Yet it was in the wilderness, away from all the noise, that Moses had his encounter with God at the burning bush. His isolation became the backdrop for his calling, a powerful reminder that sometimes God uses our lowest points to reveal His greatest plans. Could it be that your loneliness, your feeling of being cast aside, is the very stage God is setting for your transformation? Moses' story reminds us that rejection doesn't disqualify us from our purpose. Rather, it is often a catalyst for it. When everything familiar is stripped away, we are left with only one option: to listen to God. It was in that place of isolation that Moses heard God's voice calling him to a higher purpose, a mission far beyond anything he had imagined. And maybe, just maybe, the same is true for you. Is God trying to speak to you through your pain? Could this be the moment where He prepares you for something far greater than your current struggles suggest? By embracing the silence of rejection, we open ourselves to the possibility of encountering God in ways we never expected. Instead of fleeing from your pain, what if you leaned into it, allowing God to reshape your destiny just as He did with Moses? C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." Have you ever faced rejection so painful that it made you question everything about your purpose? That moment when the very people you tried to help turned against you, leaving you confused, hurt, and desperate for escape. Moses knew this feeling all too well. After defending an Israelite by killing an Egyptian oppressor, he thought his people would see him as their protector. But when he later tried to intervene between two Israelites, their rejection cut him deeply. The fear and guilt overwhelmed him, forcing him to flee into isolation. It's in this very place where we feel abandoned, misunderstood, and alone that God often does his most transformative work. Have you ever wondered why your hardest moments seem to lead to unexpected growth? Just like Moses, we may want to run from our failures, hiding from the pain of rejection. Yet, it was in the wilderness, away from all the noise, that Moses had his encounter with God at the burning bush. His isolation became the backdrop for his calling, a powerful reminder that sometimes God uses our lowest points to reveal his greatest plans. Could it be that your loneliness, your feeling of being cast aside, is the very stage God is setting for your transformation? Moses' story reminds us that rejection doesn't disqualify us from our purpose. Rather, it is often a catalyst for it. When everything familiar is stripped away, we are left with only one option: to listen to God. It was in that place of isolation that Moses heard God's voice calling him to a higher purpose, a mission far beyond anything he had imagined. And maybe, just maybe, the same is true for you. Is God trying to speak to you through your pain? Could this be the moment where he prepares you for something far greater than your current struggles suggest? By embracing the silence of rejection, we open ourselves to the possibility of encountering God in ways we never expected. Instead of fleeing from your pain, what if you leaned into it, allowing God to reshape your destiny just as he did with Moses? If you find that people around you seem to detest your presence or reject your company for no apparent reason, it could be a sign that God is calling you to be alone with him. Don't take offense, and don't try to force acceptance. Just as Joseph forgave his brothers, recognizing that their actions were part of God's plan, so too should you view these rejections as part of God's divine purpose for your life. Sign 3. A feeling of disconnection from others. Have you ever experienced that peculiar sensation of being surrounded by people, yet feeling an overwhelming sense of isolation? Imagine being in a bustling room, where laughter and conversation swirl around you. But despite the vibrant social scene, a profound loneliness settles in. The chatter that once intrigued you now seems like a distant hum, and gatherings that once brought you joy now leave you feeling drained and uninspired. It's not that the people around you have intentionally distanced themselves, nor have they done anything to alienate you. Instead, there's a subtle, yet significant, shift happening within you. This internal disconnection isn't merely a product of external circumstances, but maybe a sign of something deeper. What if this unsettling feeling of detachment is more than just a passing phase? What if this deep-seated longing for solitude is, in fact, an invitation from God? As you begin to retreat from the clamor of social engagements and the perpetual buzz of daily life, you might find yourself grappling with the question of why the things that once brought you joy now seem inadequate. Could it be that this discontent is God's gentle nudge, calling you to embark on a more profound spiritual journey? This period of solitude, rather than being a cause for concern, could be a divine prompt leading you toward a deeper connection with him. Consider the possibility that God is orchestrating this internal shift to invite you into a space where his presence can be more clearly discerned. It's as if he is beckoning you to step away from the superficial and the transient, to focus your attention on what truly matters. In this solitude, God may be offering you the opportunity to explore a more intimate relationship with him, one that requires your undivided attention and heartfelt engagement. This yearning for solitude, though it may seem uncomfortable or disconcerting, could be the very thing that draws you closer to understanding and fulfilling God's purpose for your life. So, as you navigate through this period of solitude, reflect on its potential significance. Could it be that God is calling you to a space of deeper reflection, where his voice can be heard more distinctly? Are you open to embracing this call to solitude as a chance to renew and strengthen your relationship with him? This period of isolation might not be a sign of abandonment, but rather an invitation to connect more deeply with the divine purpose that lies beyond the ordinary distractions of life. This inner stirring isn't a sign of something wrong. It may very well be God's way of guiding you into a sacred space of reflection and growth. When the things of the world no longer satisfy, when social media feels shallow, and your soul craves depth, it's a sign that something within you is evolving. Lewis once spoke about how humans often try to fill their inner hunger with all the wrong things, only to discover that earthly pleasures are never enough. Have you noticed this restlessness? As though the things that used to bring joy now leave you feeling hollow. That very hollowness could be a divine invitation for you to be still, to withdraw, and to seek God in ways that are unfamiliar yet deeply transformative. In these moments of disconnection, God may be gently nudging you to release your reliance on external validation and instead turn your ear to the subtle whisper of His voice. This shift in your desires is not a rejection of the people around you, but rather a redirection towards a higher calling. Perhaps God is making room for you to hear His guidance more distinctly, removing the noise and distractions that often obscure His presence. It is often within these quiet, solitary spaces away from the clamor and demands of the world that we can finally begin to discern the deep longings of our soul. This longing for solitude may very well be God's way of preparing you for something greater, a season of spiritual growth and transformation where He seeks to mold and shape you for the journey ahead. Have you ever sensed a pull towards solitude that transcends mere introversion, a profound yearning that draws you away from the usual din of daily life, urging you to seek deeper reflection? This desire for quiet is not a form of avoidance or laziness. Rather, it is a deep, spiritual need for space to connect with God on a more intimate level. When the urge to engage in social activities or constant busyness wanes, it might be God's invitation to enter into a sacred space, a place where His voice can be heard more clearly, free from the clutter that often clouds our minds. In these moments, you're given a unique opportunity to listen more intently, to understand the spiritual truths that might be lost in the noise of everyday life, and to align yourself more closely with God's purpose for you. Have you recently experienced a deep, unsettling feeling that no matter how much you engage with the world, something essential remains unfulfilled? This sense of incompleteness, this whisper of unspoken pain or unmet desires, might be leading you into a season of solitude. It's in these quiet, solitary moments that God's voice often becomes most distinct. As one reflective Christian writer insightfully noted, solitude is not about retreating from the world, but about making space for God's presence to be more clearly heard. Have you ever wondered if this urge to withdraw from daily distractions could be God's way of inviting you into a closer relationship with Him? Instead of filling the silence with temporary escapes, whether through constant entertainment or superficial activities, this time apart offers a precious opportunity for deeper spiritual connection and healing. Solitude is not a sign of weakness or avoidance, but a divine invitation to recalibrate and refocus. It challenges us to pause and truly listen. As you navigate this period of quiet, consider how you might use it to seek God's guidance more intentionally. Will you embrace this chance to allow God to mend the wounds that the busyness of life often hides? In moments of silence, we are offered clarity and a renewed sense of purpose. Reflecting on the notion that we are most alive when we are aware of our need for God, we find that these periods of solitude can lead us to profound insights and spiritual renewal. This season of solitude, though perhaps challenging, is a chance for spiritual growth and alignment with God's plan for your life. Embrace it as an opportunity to realign your heart and mind, turning away from the noise to find the voice that truly satisfies your soul. Like every season, this time of quiet will eventually pass. But if we fail to embrace it, we risk losing the growth, wisdom, and intimacy with God that could have emerged from it. What if this solitude is God's way of drawing you into something new, something life-changing? Consider how you can make space for God in the silence, where your deepest longings might finally find their answer. Consider the Israelites, who were prophesied to spend 400 years in slavery. Yet their time in bondage was extended by 30 years because Moses wasn't ready to lead them out. Your willingness to separate yourself and seek God can either delay or hasten His plans for your life. If you feel disconnected from others and have a desire to be alone, it is likely that God is calling you into solitude for a purpose. Sign 4. A desire for purpose and assignment. Have you ever felt an overwhelming sense of purpose, as though your heart is burdened with a divine assignment? Quite grasping, this deepening awareness is often a sign that God is calling you into a season of solitude, inviting you to draw nearer to Him for direction and strength. It's as if He's saying, I have something significant planned for you, but first, come to me for clarity and empowerment. In the quiet moments of reflection, it's vital to remember the profound truth that we can make anything by writing as it resonates deeply with our journey of faith and trust. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the weight of relationships and choices that seem misaligned with your spiritual path? Have you sensed a nagging disquiet within your heart, a sign that something crucial is amiss, even when outward appearances might suggest otherwise? It's often in these moments of unrest that God calls us to a deeper understanding and surrender. Much like how C.S. Lewis reflects on the nature of true faith and divine guidance, recognizing that our inner turmoil can signal a divine nudge toward realignment with God's will. Imagine this unrest as a gentle but firm hand guiding you to release what no longer serves your purpose, relationships, habits, or choices that cloud your spiritual clarity. When God asks us to let go, it's not merely a matter of severing ties but a profound act of trust. We are invited to surrender our desires and fears, allowing divine wisdom to take precedence over our own limited understanding. As you pray for guidance, remember to invite God into your decision-making process, asking Him to purify your desires and align your heart with His will. Trust that He sees beyond what we can perceive and knows what is best for us, even if it means letting go of what once seemed essential. Seek to be surrounded by those who uplift and challenge you to grow in your faith, rather than those who hinder your spiritual progress. Surround yourself with friends who reflect God's love and truth, ensuring they help ignite and nurture the fire within you, rather than dimming it. As you move forward, remain open to the new opportunities and blessings God has in store. Embrace His guidance with a heart willing to follow His lead, knowing that all things work together for your good. Trust in His plan, even when it seems unclear, and allow His wisdom to guide you through every decision. Consider this. Have you been seeking to achieve your purpose with your own strength, only to feel exhausted and disheartened? The truth is, God's intention is not for you to fail but to succeed in your calling. By waiting on Him, as Isaiah 40 verse 31 promises, you will find your strength renewed. The time spent in solitude is not a delay but a divine preparation, a chance to be spiritually refreshed and empowered for the journey ahead. Don't let the urgency of your calling push you into premature action. Embrace the solitude God provides, and let it be the foundation upon which you build your strength and clarity for the tasks He has set before you. Sign 5. Circumstances and situations isolating you. Have you ever noticed how God seems to orchestrate your life in ways that pull you toward solitude? External changes like a new job, a broken relationship, or sudden shifts in plans might initially appear as mere inconveniences. Yet these moments are often divine arrangements meant to create space for a deeper connection with Him. Reflect on how the Apostle Paul, after his profound encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, spent 3 days in blindness and isolation. This period wasn't just a punishment, it was a sacred time for reflection and realignment with God's will. Similarly, these disruptions in your life might be God's invitation to a personal retreat. Have you felt the sting of unexpected solitude, perhaps through a sudden shift or the end of a cherished relationship? Such times can be disheartening, but they are often God's way of drawing you closer to Him. Instead of viewing these moments as obstacles, consider them as opportunities, times when God is creating room for you to deepen your relationship with Him. Just as C.S. Lewis observed, you can make anything by writing. This solitude can be a space where you write a new chapter in your spiritual journey, one of intimacy and profound understanding with God. In these periods of isolation, we might wrestle with feelings of loneliness or frustration. Yet, it is through these very experiences that God often imparts His wisdom and prepares us for our future. Proverbs 18 verse 1 highlights that through desire man, having separated himself, intermeddleth with all wisdom. Embrace this time as a divine opportunity to gain wisdom and prepare yourself for what lies ahead. Much like the disciples who were called to be with Jesus before being sent out, God is equipping you through your solitude for the work He has set before you. So, if your surroundings seem to be pushing you toward isolation, recognize it as a divine setup. Instead of resisting, embrace this season. It's a vital part of your spiritual development, a time to cut through distractions and focus solely on God. This intentional solitude allows you to listen more closely, to hear God's voice amidst the quiet, and to prepare for the future He has planned for you. Conclusion. In the quiet moments of solitude, we often find ourselves grappling with deeper truths about our relationship with God. The truth is, of course, that what one calls the self is really just a series of habits, as a thoughtful Christian writer once noted. This series of habits, both good and bad, is what shapes our spiritual journey. Have you ever felt a pull toward isolation, not out of loneliness but from a profound yearning for a closer connection with God? This isn't merely a fleeting desire or an escape from the busyness of life. It's a divine nudge, inviting you to a sacred space where you can truly encounter God. Consider this. What if the seeming rejection or the unexpected solitude in your life isn't a punishment, but a purposeful invitation? Perhaps the closed doors and quiet moments are God's way of saying, "Come closer. Here, I can show you more of who I am and who you are in me." This season of being alone is not a time to resist, but an opportunity to lean in, to deepen your relationship with God. By embracing this solitude, you open yourself up to His teaching, His preservation, and His empowerment. How often do we miss the transformative power that solitude can bring? simply because we are too afraid to face it? When you see these signs, whether they be internal longings or external shifts in your life, recognize them as invitations to grow. God is preparing you, strengthening you, and guiding you towards a greater purpose. Embrace this time with an open heart, knowing that through this process, you will not only find greater wisdom and strength, but also discover a more profound sense of your divine calling.